For over a century, the US-Canada border stood as a symbol of trust and cooperation, the world's longest undefended frontier. But on August 1, 2025, that changed overnight. Canada enacted a sweeping new policy, building an invisible wall that restricts American land access to Alaska. This isn't a wall of concrete, but a regulatory fortress, upending lives and challenging the foundation of US-Canada relations. The days of a simple drive up the Alaska Highway are gone, replaced by confusion and frustration for travelers and businesses alike. The Northern Transit Integrity Act is more than a travel inconvenience. It's a profound geopolitical shift, signaling a new era of Canadian assertiveness. For Alaska, now cut off from the lower 48 except by air or sea, the isolation is immediate and palpable. This deliberate policy redefines the continent's landscape, forcing Washington to respond and leaving the world to wonder what comes next for these two old friends. The Northern Transit Integrity Act, effective August 1, 2025, imposes strict new conditions on U.S. citizens and commercial traffic traveling by land to Alaska. Private U.S. citizens can no longer drive through Canada for tourism, family visits, or relocation, ending the annual migration of RVs and vacationers. Trucking companies must now apply for costly, bureaucratic permits for each shipment, with approvals limited to critical goods like medical supplies and food staples. Designated transit corridors, such as the Alaska Highway, are now under heightened surveillance, with mandatory GPS tracking and no unscheduled stops allowed. Severe penalties await any deviation from the rigid non-stop travel itinerary. New fees, $1,500 per truck, and a $500 environmental levy per vehicle, add financial strain, making land transit nearly unviable. Canadian officials claim these measures protect the environment and national interests, but U.S. businesses see them as punitive and protectionist. The result: Alaska's land link to the rest of the U.S. is all but severed. The open US-Canada border was a model of peaceful coexistence and economic integration for generations. Communities like Point Roberts, Washington, and the Alaska Highway itself were built on this seamless relationship. The new restrictions shatter that understanding, reversing decades of cooperation, from WWII's joint highway construction to NAFTA's free trade. Where border crossings were once formalities, they're now barriers. Canada is leveraging its geography to control American access to Alaska, a move unprecedented in modern history. The presumption of trust has been replaced by scrutiny and control. This marks the end of an era defined by openness and the start of a more uncertain, contentious chapter. The border, once a symbol of friendship, is now a line of division. The act disrupts the critical network of highways connecting Alaska to the lower 48, especially the legendary Alaska Highway. This route, once the main artery for goods and travelers, is now largely closed to Americans. Feeder routes like the Cassiar and Haines highways are also affected, isolating regions like the Yukon and Alaska. Yukon's economy, heavily reliant on American tourism, faces collapse. Communities like Whitehorse and Watson Lake risk becoming ghost towns. In Alaska, 25% of inbound freight arrives via Canadian highways. Now, catastrophic delays and soaring costs threaten businesses and consumers. Small towns like Hyder, Alaska, which depend on Canadian access for basic services, are plunged into crisis. Even Point Roberts, Washington is watching nervously, fearing similar restrictions. The policy has created pockets of hardship and exposed the vulnerability of communities dependent on cross-border goodwill. The once busy highways are now silent, their future uncertain. Canada justifies the act on three pillars: environmental protection, national security, and sovereignty. Officially, it's about protecting northern ecosystems from heavy traffic, citing studies of environmental damage along the Alaska Highway. But beneath the surface, national security and sovereignty concerns loom large. Ottawa wants to control who crosses its vast northern territories. The act is also seen as retaliation for recent U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods and stalled negotiations over key treaties. By exploiting America's reliance on Canadian corridors, Canada gains leverage in broader disputes. Domestically, the policy appeals to voters who feel Canada's interests are overshadowed by the U.S. It's a bold, controversial assertion of national autonomy, trading stability for control. The act is a calculated gamble, one that risks long-term damage for short-term political gain. Canada is sending a clear message. Its territory is not just a hallway for its neighbor. The economic shock is immediate and severe. Alaska's supply chain, worth nearly $2 billion annually, is disrupted. Retailers face shortages, construction projects stall, and inflation rises. Yukon and northern British Columbia, dependent on American travelers, see their service economies collapse. Thousands of jobs and millions in revenue vanish. Relief packages are promised, but many fear they'll fall short. The North American trucking industry, highly integrated, faces logistical chaos as business models collapse overnight. Ports in Alaska need rapid investment to handle increased maritime traffic, but upgrades will take years. In the meantime, Alaska must rely on slower, costlier shipping, with taxpayers likely footing the bill for air freight subsidies. The act's ripple effects threaten cross-border investment and cooperation, adding friction to an already strained trade relationship. One policy decision has created new costs and inefficiencies that will linger for years. Official reactions have been swift and sharp. The White House condemned the act as punitive, demanding emergency consultations and recalling the U.S. ambassador from Ottawa. Canada stands firm, defending its right to control its borders and reclaim authority over its land. Local voices express frustration and despair. Mayors, business owners, and residents describe communities cut off and livelihoods destroyed. In Whitehorse, motel owners fear bankruptcy. In Tok, Alaska, the gateway is slammed shut. Indigenous leaders warn the act disrupts traditional cross-border movement, implemented without proper consultation. The policy's human cost is profound, severing not just economic ties, but also deep-rooted cultural and family connections. The crisis exposes the fragility of border communities and the far-reaching impact of high-level decisions. The border is no longer just a line on a map. It's a barrier in people's lives. The diplomatic fallout is immediate and severe, threatening the world's most successful bilateral relationship. The U.S. considers retaliatory tariffs and border slowdowns, risking chaos for Canadian exporters. Decades of security and defense cooperation, NORAD, Five Eyes, are now at risk as trust erodes. Pentagon officials warn that if Canada blocks U.S. access to Alaska, it raises doubts about broader partnership reliability. The conflict sends troubling signals globally, undermining the image of North American stability and unity. Geopolitical rivals may exploit this rift, seeing even the closest alliances as fragile. Resolving the dispute will require tough, protracted negotiations, likely entangling the Alaska issue with other trade and resource conflicts. A quick fix is unlikely. The relationship may remain strained for years. The border, once a symbol of friendship, is now a source of tension and uncertainty. Canada's Northern Transit Integrity Act marks a monumental shift, isolating Alaska and ending a century of open passage. The move, rooted in environmental and sovereign concerns, is widely seen as a strategic power play amid trade disputes and rising nationalism. The consequences are immediate: economic hardship, severed supply chains, and a logistical nightmare for both countries. Official responses are sharp, setting the stage for a serious diplomatic conflict and threatening long-standing cooperation. The world's longest undefended frontier is now a line of contention, not connection. The human cost is profound. Disrupted lives, uncertain futures, and broken ties that once bound border communities together. The era of taking the open border for granted is over. Trust has been replaced by leverage. When a border built on friendship becomes a weapon of policy, can trust ever be fully restored?